Boston beat the severely shorthanded Cleveland basketball squad 109-102, the final. And that means now that the C's have taken a 3-1 lead in the Eastern Conference semifinals, which if you look at the comps that tell you what has happened, not what's going to happen, 95% of the time a team that's up 3-1 ends up winning the series. Jaylen Brown, who was much better down the stretch in that game, 27 points for the Celtics, who can close out Cleveland and turn out the lights. The party's over. If they can win Game 5, the problem is that's at the arena there in Boston, at the Garden, on Wednesday night, and the Celtics, even though they have home court advantage, didn't play all that well at home. So the Cavs are on the brink of elimination. Let us discuss the question, your thoughts on the Celtics and their victory over the Cadavers in this game. So I've got Jukebox, Panhandling, and Boogeyman. And we will combine all of these things together, and we are going to make a headache, a migraine headache, which is what the Cavaliers had at the end of this game. Because the way the Celtics played, my first thought here, the way the Celtics played, that was a game where ifs and buts were candy and nuts, and Donovan Mitchell plays, then the Cavaliers win that game. The Celtics were just going through the motions. They were going through the motions in this game, and you don't get extra flowers if you're Boston because you do what you're supposed to do. Cleveland, without two of their top players, the top player, Donovan Mitchell, with a calf injury. Oh, my calf! He couldn't play. And Jared Allen, he had a rib problem. And so those guys sat out the game, and instead of this being another blowout, the Cavaliers, they were hanging around. The Celtics unable to close the gap and blow out Cleveland by 25 points. They win most of their games, the Celtics, by double digits. But in the fourth quarter, Jaylen Brown, he was better. He was better in the fourth quarter. And he put up a couple of shekels into the jukebox there, and they cranked up the old Canadian rock group, a Bachman-Turner Overdrive. They cranked up Taking Care of Business, ho-hum, down the stretch. It was a box-checking exercise is what it was. The Celtics did not run away with the Cadavers, though. That's the key part of this here. They failed to cover a sizable 12-point spread. And Cleveland, with a bunch of nobodies, knocking down outside shots for a good stretch in that game. The biggest lead, I believe, was 14 points. I think that's it for the Celtics. All right, now, page 2 here. Since the game itself was a bit of a dud, it was lackluster between Boston and Cleveland, we have the subplot. And a guy that doesn't play for Boston or Cleveland, LeBron James. Did you see this? What did you make of LeBron James with his wife and agent attending and sitting courtside there, attending the game in Cleveland, getting a standing ovation during the Cavs-Celtic playoff game. So I got a couple thoughts. On one hand, LeBron in the crowd there, a strategic move by LeBron, being in the crowd there. It's attention-seeking 101 by LeBron James. Nobody has been talking all that much about LeBron recently because the Lakers were exterminated from the postseason. LeBron is free to roam around the NBA. He's got the player option in the contract, and so he needs to be put on the pedestal. And what better way to be put on the pedestal if you're LeBron James than to go to your old stomping grounds in Cleveland? Now, on the other side, for the Cleveland fans, what they're doing there, that is like weed man hippie panhandling is what they're doing. They're begging LeBron, come back, LeBron, come back. Oh, almighty LeBron, we need you. Come back and save us. So the fans there putting on their knee pads and giving LeBron a very public tongue bath for the world to see there as they sucked up. It's a little awkward. And that's not your typical etiquette. LeBron broke etiquette by going to that game. When your team is not good enough to advance in the playoffs, generally speaking, they don't treat it like an all-star game, the players, and they don't go hang out and watch other teams play. That's not normal etiquette in pro bouncy ball. So LeBron doing things his way because he needed to have his ass kissed, and he knew if he showed up to the game, he'd have his ass kissed, and idiots like me would talk about him, so here we are. I thought the whole thing was rather pathetic. All right, now, final point. We pivot to the Big Apple. And what happened to the Knickerbockers? The Knickerbocker roster crumbling of late. They didn't play. They did not participate on the NBA card on Monday. But right now, the Pacers, back-to-back and belly-to-belly wins in that series. And so the series tied up 2-2. Game 5 will be coming up on Tuesday night in Midtown Manhattan. Julius Randle, Bojan Bogdanovic, and Mitchell Robinson out for the playoffs, and OG Anunoby with a bad hamstring. He's also out for Game 5, but not for the playoffs. Jalen Brunson's dinged up. All of that led to a former NBA player, a player named Chandler Parsons. You probably don't know who that is because he wasn't very good. But Chandler Parsons blaming the Knickerbocker coach, Tom Thibodeau, for the many injuries that New York has had. In fact, the quote here, he said, Chandler Parsons, he said, quote, "This is why the players' poll came out with guys that don't want to play for Thibodeau, because it doesn't last." Chandler Parsons said, "You can't sustain it in such a long season." Get out the little tiny violin. What a sob story this is, having to play. "You had to play too many minutes," says Chandler Parsons. So how do you evaluate washed-up has-been Chandler Parsons blaming Tom Thibodeau for the many injuries the Knicks have had here in the postseason? So this is a trip down the river. The lazy river is what this is. My God. Chandler Parsons, I'm getting old. I remember watching Chandler Parsons play. Chandler Parsons is the personification of a hamburglar, as he stole a sports racketeering for Chandler Parsons. He averaged less than 13 points a game, had one playoff. As I remember, he had one playoff series where he played pretty well for Dallas. He then got a massive contract, and that was the end of Chandler Parsons. $127 million for less than 13 points per game. Now, New York coach Tom Thibodeau, the bullseye on Coach Tibbs, is a popular punching bag by people trying to reason with what has happened with the New York roster falling apart. He's the boogeyman. Ooh, the boogeyman for the uneducated fan and the media honks here. But the injuries, if you look at it case by case, most of these injuries were on-court injuries where players collided with the Knick player. And there were fluky things that happened. It wasn't because they were playing too many minutes. God, it is such a lazy river take. It is so pathetic. It's not because of tips. Like, things happen. Usually the team that wins is the team that has the least knee injuries and shoulder problems and elbow problems and all that. And by the way, for the Mr. Softy crowd, the pearl-clutching crowd that's out there, "Oh, it's not right. These players, oh, my God, they got to play too much." Yeah. For years, that was the norm. Back in the Stone Age, that was the norm. Big minutes, big volume of action. You were expected. It was a 48-minute game. You were expected to play 40-plus minutes. And nobody had to go dramatic here. There's not a Shakespearean drama playing out. It was not a Greek tragedy because you had to play 40-plus minutes. That was called normal. And, oh, by the way, with all of the money spent on sports medicine and all the money invested in protecting the assets, as they say, the human beings that are playing, back in the day when the guys would go out and go to the Waffle House and load up at 3 a.m. after a game, they weren't getting hurt. They weren't missing as many games as they are today. So you explain that to me. How is it that these NBA guys and all these people that are the jock-sniffing crowd that are out there that get so upset? It's, oh, my God, the guffaws. I can't believe these players are being expected to play this many minutes. It's so terrible. And yet, back in the day, when they did play those minutes, it was expected, and you just did it, and that's how it worked. You had a job to do, and you did the job, and yet they didn't get hurt nearly as often as they do today.